Hello friends, good morning and welcome to our EduSite network. Our topic of discussion today is part of our series on American literature, and the specific topic for today is Black American poetry, friends. And for this very discussion and lecture, we have thus in our studio Dr. Bhim Singh Daya, retired professor of English and former vice chancellor of Kurukshetra University. Let us welcome him and also request him to begin our today's lecture. Thank you for coming, sir.
Thank you. Well, for today we have black literature, the poetry part of it. And black poetry, like black fiction we did yesterday, begins right in the 17th century when blacks were brought as slaves to America, because the settlement of America began in 1607, and with the settlement came the slaves as well. So the earliest black poetry dates 1619, so as early as that. But at that time, being slaves, they could not think of writing or publishing regular poetry or literature as such. So what they could do was to follow their ancestral oral tradition from Africa and sing them. So this was mostly in the form of songs, hymns, but then it was always about their own condition. And the condition of the slave, they can always talk about their helplessness, their oppression, ill treatment, so on and so forth. So that is the story of black poetry as it begins in the 17th century. Well, from 18th century, late 18th in fact, onward, then we have written black poetry. We will not be able to touch upon all the poets that the black community in America produced. It's a long list, happily. But we will pick up the major ones and talk about them. The first one that comes to mind is a woman, a poet, Phyllis, Phillis, Phyllis Wheatley, Wheatley, from wheat it is Wheatley. Well, her years are 1753 to 1784, so later 18th century. A few lines from one of her poems will give the idea of what kind of poet she was and what kind of black poetry was at that time. It was not long since I left my native shore. It was not long since I left my native shore. Second line, the Lord of errors and Egyptian gloom. The land of errors and Egyptian gloom. Third line, Father of mercy. It was thy gracious hand. And last line, brought me in safety from these dark abodes. So what is significant here is one looking back to native shore, means Africa. So this poetry is nostalgic. Nostalgia is about the home they have been compelled to leave. It was not of their own will that they left Africa. They were forcibly brought as slaves. They were sold for just a few pennies. Another thing of note, importance, is calling it their home the land of errors and Egyptian gloom. Land of errors and gloom. And then praying to God, praying to Lord, Father of mercy. It was thy gracious hand brought me in safety from these dark abodes. So dark, this epithet is again important. Darkness refers to their own color, but darkness also refers to their own condition. So the dark days, dark life, gloomy life, that is their destiny. And in such a situation, two things, you see, come up prominently. One, looking back nostalgically to their original home. And secondly, relying upon the mercy of God for their well-being, because they have no other help, no other, aid to see them through. So it's a sort of trial life that they have to lead. And Phyllis Wheatley, the woman poet, very well puts it. Well, we saw that the same nostalgia and complaint were the main features of the black fiction also. But then the power that poetry has in a concentrated form to articulate the emotion is not possible in prose. Prose, you write hundreds of pages to communicate something. Here a few lines communicate. So Wheatley does it very well, and she communicates the black experience, the Negro experience in America in the earliest phase, the first phase of 17th century. And she herself was kidnapped from her native Senegal, Senegal, one of the African countries. She was kidnapped at the age of 17 and then was sold to Wheatley family of Boston. So Wheatley, the last name is borrowed from the owner of the slave. That was the convention. They had to do that because they don't belong to themselves. They belong to the master, the owner. A few more lines from her. This nigger run. This is D-I-S. That's how they would write. This nigger run. He run his best. You can see the English, whatever English they knew. He run his best. Second line. Stuck his head in a hornet's nest. That was their condition. Hornet's nest. Stuck his head in a hornet's nest. Jumped. The fence and run. from the pastor. From is FRU and the DE from the pastor. Jumped the DE, jumped the fence FENCE, and run from the pastor. Last line, white man run to catch him, but nigger run faster. So can't be caught. So that is the hornet's nest in which the blacks were living in the early phase. They are slaves, they are caught, they are living a sort of prison life, and the attempt is always to run out of the prison, and they are chased, and when they are caught they are not only beaten, they are burned. So the attempt is to run faster so that they are not caught. So Phyllis Wheatley sums it up very well. The next poet of significance I would consider is George Horton. George Horton, Horton, 1797 to 1883. So that brings us to the 19th century. From 18th now to 19th century. By the way, in the early 19th century, 1827, came out the first Negro newspaper. So they had a voice now of their own. And they could do that because they are now getting bolder. And that's why in 1865 came the abolition of slavery. So abolitionist movement had started right with the establishment of this paper. And no wonder in 1829, 2 years after this paper, Horton could write a poem like Freedom's Journal. Freedom's Journal. That was in fact the title of the volume, not of the poem alone, of the volume of poems, Freedom's Journal in 1929. Also wrote Hope of Liberty. So now it's not so much nostalgia that they are writing about. It is now the hope. They are looking forward now to liberation from slavery. And these lines from Horton, I'm quoting from Hope of Liberty. How long have I in bondage lain? How long have I in bondage lain, Lain, and languished to be free, waiting to be freed, and languished to be free. Sign of exclamation. Third line, alas, and must I still complain? Last line, deprived of liberty. So, that is the situation. They are halfway now from nostalgia in bondage looking for freedom. So, 3 stages of the black story in America. And it is very well depicted, very well painted in poetry. The abolitionist movement, of course, stimulated a great surge of Negro protest literature, including poetry, and that is what brought Harlem Renaissance. There was American Renaissance in general also, which is called Second Renaissance. The first Renaissance was 1832, Emerson, Thoreau, Walcott, and culminating into Walt Whitman. Second Renaissance is 1920s, where you have a great number of American writers, whites as well as blacks, writing. So parallel to the white Renaissance is this black Renaissance, which is called Harlem. Harlem is a part of New York, and that is where there is concentration of black population. So they feel at home there, feel secure. Elsewhere they don't feel safe. So Harlem is a kind of homeland to them. So Harlem Renaissance brought a large number of writers, musicians, artists, and they constituted a sort of society and a group and a common manifesto and poetics, painters, musicians, poets, novelists, even prose tracts, and so on. So lot of writing. There are books on the Harlem Renaissance. One of the Indian scholars also, Amritjit Singh, still in America, he did his first book on the Harlem Renaissance. So it was a Negro Renaissance, a renewal of self-respect and self-dependence. These are the two outstanding qualities of the literature of the time. Talking of self-respect and self-dependence. Well, here the important writer, I would say, was Claude Mckay, C-L-A-U-D-E, Claude Mckay, M-C-K capital, K-A-Y, M-C-K-A-Y, 1889-1948. So early part of the 20th century. A contemporary of Eliot, Pound, Modern, etc. And you remember I quoted yesterday also his famous poem. He was also a novelist, a very talented writer among blacks who wrote poetry, who wrote novels, who wrote prose books, autobiography, so on and so forth. So a major writer. And that poem I quote, "If we must die, let it not be like hogs. If we must die, oh, let us nobly die." Quoting from Churchill in a way. But adopting that, he wrote a full poem. And by the way, he was the first Negro to go to Russia. So getting reoriented to Marxist ideology. Not that he became a thorough one, but some influence of Marxism he brought from Russia. Second poet of the Renaissance, Black Renaissance, Harlem Renaissance, was Countee Cullen, C-O-U-N-T-E-E, Countee Cullen, C-U-L-L-E-N. His famous poem is Black Christ. Black Christ. Nobody could think of Black Christ. The whites would not forgive them. But then in the 20th century, they could have the courage to stand on their own and to hit back, just as now in the post-colonial era, we have books like The Empire Writes Back. So the blacks could write back now in the 20th century. And the Black Christ poem, I have a few lines that will give you an idea of what it was like, the literature of the Renaissance. I have a fear, he used to say. This is the first line. I have a fear, this is within quotes. I have a fear, he used to say. And quotes again, some man contemptuous of my race. Some man, a man, contemptuous of my race, third line, will strike me down for being black. Will strike me down for being black. Next line, but when I answer, I will pay back. But when I answer, I'll pay back. Next line, the late revenge long overdue. Sorry. The late revenge long overdue. Last line, 1,000 of my kind and hue. 1,000 of my kind and hue. So now you can see the emerging militancy in the black writing. They are not merely complaining, nor merely protesting, but now they are getting on their knees and are ready to revolt, ready to hit back. So self-confidence, self-reliance, and now they want to speak out what has been done to them, all the oppression and so on. Well, the next important and a very important poet was Langston Hughes. And his famous poem, Montage of a Dream Deferred. Montage, M-O-N-T-A-G-E, montage of a dream deferred, which again is a protest poem. Because after all, the blacks also had a dream. But what happens to a dream when you do not have the power to execute it? When you are a slave, when you are bonded, when you are oppressed by the dominant, community. Then what happens to the dream? Montage of a dream deferred. Then dream is deferred, and deferred forever, never being realized. So a few lines. What happens to a dream deferred? That is the first line. What happens to a dream deferred? Sign of interrogation. Second line, does it dry up? Does it dry up? Third line, like a raisin in the sun. Like a raisin in the sun. Later, you will remember Hunsbury, Lawrence Hunsbury, wrote a play, A Raisin in the Sun. So that's how black literature is connected, you see, one piece with another. So like a raisin in the sun. And at the end, after a few lines, or does it explode? Yeah, there comes a stage when it explodes also. There was a time when it dried like the raisin in the sun. The dreams were never realized. They died dreaming. They died as slaves. But then Now in the 20th century they can hope, because they have taken to militancy now. The dream now explodes, and explosion now will have its own logic. You can't stop it. Another poem by Langston Hughes, very famous, is Freedom's Plough, P-L-O-W, Freedom's Plough. A few lines from that poem. From that seed a tree grew. From that seed a tree grew, comma, is growing, comma, will ever grow. So now you can see a different tone altogether, a different note of confidence, note of hope. They look to the future now, no longer any nostalgia for the lost home. Now they have a dream for the future, and they are confident that they will realize that dream. From that seed now a tree has grown and is growing and will ever grow. Now they are confident nobody can stop them. Now they will have their full growth. That tree is for everybody, for all America, for all the world. Now look at their vision. The vision is enlarged now. It's not confined to Harlem, to the blacks, to America even. Now it has global proportions. That tree is for everybody, for all America, for all the world. May its branches spread and its shelter grow. May its branches spread and its shelter grow until all races and all peoples know its shade. Keep your hands on the plough. That's how it ends. Keep your hand on the plough. Hold on. So if you hold on and keep going, then you will certainly reach your destination someday. Well, one more poet. So that will be half a dozen. Sixth. And we begin with a woman poet. We will end with a woman poet. Now this time it is Gwendolyn, Gwendolyn, Dolyn. This is one word. Gwendolyn Brooks, Brooks. Well, she is a product of Harlem Renaissance and lived right up to later 20th century. Some of her famous poems are Field Potatoes. You can see their link with the link of the black life with plantation, because they were brought as plantation slaves doing the agriculture work for the white folk. Field Potatoes. The other is Garbage Ripening in the Hall. That was the other occupation. They were made to work. Garbage. So garbage pickers. Garbage ripening in the hall. Another is, we think of lukewarm water, hope to get in it. So hot water bath. Do you remember T.S. Eliot, The Wasteland, hot water at 10, so on and so forth. So there it's a style. Here it is a hunger, a wish that we also someday, we think of lukewarm water, hope to get in it someday. Another is the independent man, another poem, the independent man. And the last is when I die. Yeah, death is always on their mind. But then, if we must die, say the same, Claude Mckay. Here again, when I die. From the poem Riders to the Blood-Red Wrath. Riders to the Blood-Red Wrath, W-R-A-T-H. You remember another famous title by an American, Steinbeck, famous novel, Grapes of Wrath.
Grapes of Wrath, yes.
So here again, blood-red wrath, riders to the blood-red wrath. Here are some lines from this poem. For even if we come out standing up, how shall we smile, congratulate and bow? Etiquettes. How shall we smile, congratulate and bow? Settle in chairs. Yeah. Listen. The step of iron feet again and again wild. So in this normal life of etiquettes, of feasting, suddenly you have iron feet again. So they hear the sound of the feet coming, which means the fear still lurks, the fear of the oppressors. They are not yet mentally completely free from that fear. That experience which they have had for centuries haunts them. They are still being haunted. And again, wild. The response to oppression is wild. Now they want to, they will go mad and react against the oppression. Well, I think we stop there, begin with a woman poet and end with a woman poet. So half a dozen black American poets, in between two very important male black poets, Claude Mckay and Langston Hughes, towering figures. They can compare with any American poet, even white poets. And one enjoys reading them. Anyway, I think this should be sufficient. Now you can have questions and queries.
Right, sir. Sir, since we began talking about the Black American poetry with Phyllis Wheatley, I would like to just draw attention to the kind of language that she used. And very interestingly, you had also mentioned a bit from her poem that she makes use of words such as from. She spells it as FRU.
Yes.
Then it begins with the DIS, this. So very interestingly, she says, this nigger run. So like you had mentioned, this stands for this THIS, and the becomes DE. So like you had mentioned, this was because she was not educated. She had come as a slave to the United States, and then been taken up by a family, so she had not, probably did not have much chance of an education. And
Exactly. Yeah, the blacks in America, particularly in this phase, they were denied education. They could not join any school, racial discrimination. So, uneducated black people, they just picked up the dialect, the spoken English, which is grammatically not correct, phonetically not sound. So with all these limitations and deficiencies, still they also had their feelings, their emotions, which they wanted to express. So obviously they expressed that in the dialect, not regular English, which they did not know. So the spoken dialect which they knew, they used for expressing their emotions and sentiments, aspirations and ideas.
absolutely. And sir, we can also say that it is really commendable for somebody who does not know the language so well, who does not have such a good command over the grammar, but is still coming out with his or her poetry, and it is a mark of them asserting themselves.
Yeah,
powerfully.
imagine a 17-year-old girl kidnapped, captured, misused, made a slave, doing the slave work, and she writes in her, stolen moments, because she can't dare write in their presence. She will be beaten. You see, that reminds me, unfortunately, even in this 21st century or the last, and in our own country, there are people living in those conditions. I am reminded of Baby Kamli.
Yes.
Imagine a servant girl snatching moments to herself from the slave work and writing on just pieces of paper, whichever she could find, and then storing them, hiding them, and finally one day publishing her autobiography. One of my friends, she has translated it into English, Maya Pandit from Hyderabad, IFLU, English and Foreign Languages University. The title is The Prisons We Broke.
Right. Absolutely, sir.
So human stories are very common. It may be America, it may be India.
Absolutely, there are no barriers. What could happen there is also happening here.
Yes.
Sir, I just wanted to ask you, there may have also been others, of course, who were writing like Miss Wheatley, and trying to write during the stolen moments and coming up with such works. And the level of English which they used perhaps discontinued for a while until they could come up as educated people and write in proper
No,
English.
actually that difference between the dialect of the black people and the white continues. If you talk to the black people even today, they can't overcome their own accent. They continue speaking like that. So habitually, unless you have a very well educated, sophisticated professor or a bureaucrat. That's a different matter. But average black person in America will use the same dialect even today. I have spoken to them. And often it is hard to follow them. You don't really know what they are talking about because their accent is so different.
Yes. Yes, there's that distinction in the accent, of course. And just to clarify, we talked about the first Negro newspaper that came out in 1827, and it gave to them a voice which they had been long seeking. And it was it after this that the abolitionist movement started with the publishing of this start of this paper?
Yeah, sure. It did because it spread awareness among the blacks themselves, and that is what a newspaper does. And gradually, you see, the message precipitated into a militant voice asking for justice, and finally it did come in 1865. Abraham Lincoln, although he had to lose his life, sacrificed his life for the cause, but he succeeded in abolishing. So you are right, abolitionist movement began in a way with this newspaper, the first one of the blacks. Later, of course, there were more, but this was a pioneering paper of the blacks.
Right. Sir, and it was... we can also say that the abolitionist movement also stimulated Negro protest literature, like you also mentioned, and it provided them an encouragement to write that they would be heard by others, and they need not be so afraid of writing or giving voice to their views and feelings.
Yeah, exactly. And Harlem Renaissance, which was around the same time, this newspaper and Harlem Renaissance phenomena of the 1920s. It was a great movement. Even as late as the early 70s or late 60s, I myself saw in Harlem the kind of traditions they had developed. And considering Harlem as a nation by itself, as a country separate from America, so almost erasing from their memory their past and their any link with America. They thought they are now free and they can live with themselves, and they are not dependent on the white folk, and they don't need to look up to them for any kind of help or mercy and so on. So tremendous confidence was generated by this movement, abolitionist movement.
Right. And you also mentioned, sir, as during, and very interestingly, that Langston Hughes, he wrote in a poem that he talks about the growing of a seed that fruitions into a tree, and the fact that their dream can also be realized as against the earlier nostalgia that they used to feel. So now there's more of a positivity in their writings and within their personas also.
Yeah, in fact now shedding their bitterness, shedding even the memories of oppression, and beginning to look forward, and beginning to entertain a positive vision of life, not only for the blacks, but for the entire America and the entire world. So a vision of peace, a vision of freedom, a vision of solidarity of the people of different races, different nations. That is what we have in Langston Hughes in particular.
Right.
Yeah.
And the idea is that if you keep holding on and if you keep going on without stopping, you will reach your destination someday.
Sure. Yeah, that confidence.
Right, sir. And so we also talked about the Harlem Renaissance. So you mentioned that it came in the 1920s, and it was also called the Second Renaissance.
Yes, in American literature, because the first was in the early 19th century. Emerson, Thoreau, Walcott,
Right.
the American Romanticism, or also called Transcendentalism. Yeah, that was the first one. This is called the second one, which was both in American literature in general and the black literature in particular. And so they had a different name for it, Harlem Renaissance.
Right. And sir, was it also called the American Renaissance, or that is another?
No, the American Renaissance is the white American literature history. So that is called American Renaissance, Second American Renaissance. But they have their different one.
Okay, so
Harlem.
these two are different,
Yes.
different ones. Right. And
Although they are simultaneously there, the upsurge on both sides is during the same period of the 1920s. In fact, this was for the first time when literatures of different nationalities came together. After World War I, World War I was devastating, of course, and even the writers have wounded psyche, which comes out Hemingway, Faulkner, Pound, Eliot, writing about the effects of war, how the wounded psyche now was the prominent part of life in the West. But one good thing about the war was, a byproduct of war, was coming together of different nationalities. Paris became, in fact, a home for the artists. Americans, Germans, British, everybody rushing to Paris, and there they'll get together and write. So a sort of internationalism in literature. That's why talking of the tree as metaphor, tree as symbol, where the branches will spread all over the world, not merely continent.
right. And just a slight query, sir. This Harlem Renaissance, how long did it last? Variably.
Well, mostly 1920s, because 30s came another movement, Marxism, and it has a very strong influence. It was a very strong wave that reached America through Europe, of course. If you remember, even in English literature, the Auden group, Auden was the leading poet of the 1930s. Then Stephen Spender, C.D. Lewis, Louis MacNeice, and so on. So everybody turned left. Even the novelists, Hemingway, Steinbeck, so they too were influenced by Marxism. So it was a very strong influence in the 1930s. And the ideals of the Harlem Renaissance or the American Renaissance as such, they were overtaken by this strong wave of Marxism. So it ended there with the 20s.
Right, sir. And I just wanted to ask you, say we came across a certain line when you were reading Phyllis Wheatley's poem, and she talks about, you were reading, say, it was not long since I left my native shore, the land of errors and Egyptian gloom. Could we talk a bit about this line, sir, the land of errors and Egyptian gloom?
Yeah, a difficult line though, because it works both ways. It depicts the plight of these black people, because Egypt also is a part of Africa. If you remember Cleopatra,
Yes, absolutely, sir.
the queen of Egypt. So there also these Romans, you see, they ruled Africa. So it refers to their condition, land of errors. That's why the others have a hold on it. You are enslaved partly because of your own errors too. There has to be some weakness that someone else comes and rules over you. So she's talking of that, you see, weakness, some internal weakness in our own culture, in our own lifestyle, that invites the outsiders to rule us.
Right, so rightly said, internal weakness within her own culture. Right, sir. And towards, of course, I'm going back and forth, but towards the end, we talked about Gwendolyn Brooks, and one of her poems, there's the fear of being haunted by the oppressor even after having become free for years. That kind of a fear or that kind of an oppression still lurks in the minds. Like she talks about the iron feet, probably they could hear their masters walking, and they would feel afraid because of that, and that memory constantly comes back to them through one image or the another.
Yeah, Brooks is in the later part of the 20th century, so almost our contemporary, and even there, even at that point of time, later 20th century, the memories are not completely erased. They have not been able to get over those memories completely. Of course, they have come a long way from that situation where it was pure nostalgia, where it was just a look back. Now there is a look forth. They are looking forward. They have hope. They see bright future. And yet they are not completely free from their past. So something is still lurking in their minds of what they were. And obviously when something keeps lurking, which means there is an element of fear that maybe you are made a slave again. Well, sometimes without realizing you are a slave. But now there are sophisticated ways of enslaving you.
True.
There are psychological, there are very technological ways of making you a slave. And most people, without knowing it, are leading slave life. I think she is pointing to that condition.
Kind of slavery.
Yeah, of the blacks even today. Many of them may not be aware of it, but they are not really equal. They are not treated equal even today. That's why they remain African American. They are not Americans. As I said yesterday, everybody else is something. Asian American, African American, original American, Red Indians, but not Americans.
Yes.
Americans are only Europeans because they are in power.
True, sir.
So that's why Gramsci has a point. The dominant culture has alone the sense of possession and self-confidence. The others, consciously and unconsciously, they treat as slaves. So the so-called third world, for example, is in that position.
Absolutely, sir. And these, of course, ideas and feelings and the sense of empowerment also came out not just in poetry, but we can say that it was being equally felt through the novels.
Sure. I think one must have a comprehensive view of literature. You can't treat them separately in watertight compartments.
Absolutely.
Literatures are always related, and in fact not merely of a period nor merely of a race, but even internationally. All literatures are one. In fact, Ezra Pound used to say all languages are one. They run into each other. And he had 2 books on the methodology of learning language. He says you can't learn it in isolation because so many things come from so many streams internationally. So I think that is equally true of literature, just as Pound points out about language.
Absolutely, sir. Like you mentioned, all literatures and perhaps even all languages cannot be seen in isolation, one thing distinguished from the other. So there's always a combination, a confluence, that kind of a thing.
Yeah, Ezra Pound was a great scholar, a contemporary of T.S. Eliot. In fact, a guru of T.S. Eliot. Eliot showed him the poem, The Wasteland, and he cut out large parts of it. He says, people ask me, what did I do? Then his reply was, Ezra applied the Caesarean.
Absolutely, so that formed for a very interesting and wonderful discussion. And friends, I would like to tell you that when we come back with the series on American literature in our next month, we shall talk about black drama and black theatre at length. So let us thank sir for being here. Thank you so much, sir, for coming and sparing your valuable time.
Thank you.
We really appreciate it. And thank you, friends, for watching. We also appreciate your feedback and your constant viewing. So keep watching. Thank you and have a great day.